Welcome, everybody. My name is Sebastian Thrun. I'm welcoming you back to day 2 of the Artificial Intelligence for Healthcare in the time of COVID-19 virtual conference run by Udacity. 16,000 people have signed up, which is amazing. This topic receives more interest than almost anything we've done. And it's part of a new nano-degree program we're launching at Udacity, it just launched, called Artificial Intelligence for Healthcare, in which you do beautiful things such as, very timely, learn how to do deep learning for finding pneumonia in chest x-rays. Today, we have our highlight of the conference, our keynote with Dr. Eric Topol, entitled AI, Healthcare, and COVID, a QA and keynote with Dr. Eric Topol. Let me welcome Dr. Topol here. Professor Topol is a cardiologist. He's the director and a founder of the Scripps Research Translational Institute, a professor of molecular medicine. And for those of you who don't know this, Scripps has been one of the key players in our fight against COVID-19. It's been the very first to decode the virus, building antibodies, vaccine, has been on the forefront of repurposing drugs and doing the entire genomics for this new disease. Prior to working at Scripps, Dr. Topol worked at the Cleveland Clinic and was a professor at Case Western Reserve. He is one of the most legendary medical people ever lived. He was elected in the Institute of Medicine and National Academy of Science more than 15 years ago. He's been named the Doctor of the Decade by the Institute for Scientific Information for being one of the top 10 most cited medical researchers. In 2012, Modern Healthcare ranked Topol as the most influential physician executive in the United States. And if I counted correctly, he published 1,540 papers with, according to Google scholars, over 273,000 citations. He is among the 10 most cited people ever. His age index, for those of you who care about these statistics, is an incredible 228. Mine is a tiny 149 in comparison. Just looking at the number of papers he's written, if someone were to attempt to write one paper a month, which in scientific circle is basically impossible, it would take 128 years to get to what Dr. Topol is. Welcome to Udacity.
Oh, thanks so much, Sebastian. I ought to hire you as my agent. You're very, very kind. Really appreciate your introduction. And great to be with you and the folks at Udacity today.
Dr. Topol is a rare breed in that he's a practicing cardiologist. He has deep interest in artificial intelligence and has become a spokesperson when it comes to digital transformation in the medical system, but not just for geeks like me who build technology, but for patients and for doctors. And I want to start with a question that's on everybody's mind right now. Tell us what just happened. How did we get here and where are we and where are we going?
Well, we have a really big challenge, as everyone knows. We have a novel virus that is highly transmissible. And also, of course, it has a potential of lethality. So you have this combination of it gets to a lot of people quickly, it can be lethal, and it is stealth. That is, about 30% or more people have asymptomatic infections. And so that demonstrates that broad range of no symptoms to fatal outcomes. And it has lots of different types of presentations. The peculiar one, of course, of not being able to smell or taste, but of even things that are isolated, like, just GI symptoms or all sorts of unusual presentations in every organ of the body, potentially a target. So we have a challenge because some countries, like the United States, did not have readiness, did not have any testing. And so we backed into a horrible situation where we have diffuse spread, perhaps as many as 3 to 5% of people who've had infections. And we have, of course, only one mitigation strategy, which is basically the distancing one. So we're in a tough position. Some of the countries, at least 20 to 30, have done a remarkable job of containing the outbreak. But right now we have a challenge because the virus isn't going anywhere. And most people, 95% plus, paper just out today in Science, In France, 96% of people approximately are not infected, despite that countries being hard hit, like the US and the UK and Italy and Spain. So we have a lot of work to do. And that's where we need help. We need help from AI and lots of other help.
So yeah, when I asked, let me follow up on help. I think this new situation is often compared to the 1918, 1919 Spanish flu. And that really killed many, many millions of people. We live now almost by the calendar date, 100 years later. What has happened? And is there a different perspective today, or is it just going to be the same?
Well, what's remarkable is the similarities, in fact, Sebastian, is that the only thing that worked 100 years ago was the physical distancing. And those cities in the US that took that on did the best, and those who ignored it have fared terribly. But one thing I think is very different, and that is the science has come along. So, there was no such thing as structural biology. Here we have now 3D structures of every aspect of the virus, of the antibodies. Today was just published, 4 people recovered their antibodies, their structure, and looking at different epitopes. So we're learning from the science. We're learning from the genomics of the virus. We can track it from place to place and temporally. We didn't have AI 100 years ago, so we can use that for analytics that are quite advanced. I mean, we're much smarter. We have better tools. There was no internet, so we, I think, are in a better position to fight it. But unfortunately, the other things that are like then is the idea of convalescent plasma. The idea of the BCG vaccine arose right around then to rev up immunity. So there are some common threads, of course, but overall, I think we're in a better position to mount a response. It's just sad that, of course, back then, there was no such thing as virus testing, antigen testing, antibody testing. And here we had that, but we didn't use it, at least in the US. Some countries like Iceland and others, they were testing their population before the virus reached the country, which of course was the right strategy.
So obviously, I love what you're saying, key to life is to learn. If you were a 20-year-old today and you get really upset about the situation and you want to do something constructive about it, what would you study? How would you engage? What are the hot topics today? What are the open questions?
Well, I think today, the things that, I'm especially interested in is using our digital infrastructure in a way to support combating the COVID-19. If we're talking about COVID-19 and the virus.
Well, anything similar. I mean, this is the first pandemic worldwide in a long time. No one alive remembers any.
Right. So I think, the issue here is we're in a tough position. How can we dig out? And I think that what everybody talks about, test. You hear that all over. And there is a lot to that, of course. That's fundamental, because this is the only way to see the virus, is how it takes its toll on people, whether it's through their virus detection or their antibody response. However, there's another way to see the virus indirectly. That could be through a smart thermometer, as we've seen. But the one we're interested in is with heart rate, resting heart rate. We published earlier this year, by coincidence, not knowing we'd be facing this pandemic. For flu-like illness, we could predict that throughout the country with resting heart rate from a Fitbit. But of course, it could be from an Apple Watch or any wristband that has heart rate. The resting heart rate is exquisitely sensitive because it goes up before there's a fever. Many people never have a fever. And of course, many people have no symptoms, but their body is working against the virus, of course. So we think the resting heart rate, with that analytics of AI, we can predict where an outbreak is likely to happen. And that's, I think, a topic that it doesn't get enough respect, because people just think test, and they don't understand that digital surveillance with AI could be very useful. We've already seen body temperature be useful. The only problem with that is people have to take their temperature, whereas the watch can be passively collecting and transmitting the data.
So people have talked about this phenomenon called silent hypoxia, where the lung gets affected by pneumonia and it just works harder. So let me just ask the incredibly simple question. Why are we not just doing that? We have hundreds of thousands of people in jeopardy.
I'm amazed by that. Here we are in the US spending trillions of dollars. And what we should be thinking about is what can we arm each person with so that we can help protect them? And instead, we're talking about, of these plans of reopening while cases are still increasing and still lots of people in intensive care units and dying. So, for example, the idea, of course, would be, you touched on such a critical topic that most people don't recognize. It's not just silent hypoxia, which is, of course, the oxygen saturation diminished. But you remember the famous Diamond Princess cruise ship. When they took the people off the ship, the ones who had never had any symptoms, they did chest CT scans. Give them credit. Who would have thought they would do chest CT scans? And they found so many of these people had very severe lung damage on their chest CT. They never even felt it. So silent hypoxia is not even just the oxygen concentration, it's actually lung direct impact. And so in order to protect from that, we need metrics, we need data from people. And that's why I think whether it's resting heart rate or pulse oximetry. So here again, just Sebastian, all the watches have oximetry capability. When Apple introduced their first Apple Watch years ago, it was already loaded in. Fitbit, it's already been loaded in, all of them. But they didn't turn it on. They didn't turn it on because
Why are we not turning it on? This is not even medical diagnostics, it's just a measurement.
Exactly, and for the person, it's relative, that if it's diminishing and it's steadily diminishing, there could be a problem. So I'd like to see everyone armed with a pulse oximeter on their wrist to know if they're, part of this story. And of course, resting heart rate and the oximetry and the body temperature, all these things together, you start to get orthogonal views of each person, and also not just at the individual level, but of clusters, geographic clusters. So that's how we can get ahead of the outbreak now that we're so far behind it.
I love what you say. I wish this was the tone of the nation, because that would give me hope. You are still practicing. You told me that every Thursday you see patients. You now moved over to telemedicine from one day to the next. Is there something that you would love patients to have that at home that can help with home diagnostics? I know you're a big fan of home diagnostics.
Yes. Well, we don't respect patients enough. We still have medical paternalism where this doctor knows best, and we're afraid to lose control. But really what would be best is to give patients as much power as possible. They can be powered by validated algorithms. So of course, the first one that got approval was the heart rhythm algorithm. So now people can diagnose atrial fibrillation themselves without seeing a doctor. And it's pretty accurate. Of course, there's plenty of false alarms. But the point is that for the right people who are at risk with symptoms, it's very useful. And it prevents having to go to an emergency room necessarily, or urgent care, or getting medical attention. So we have the beginning of a path. And as you and I were talking about before we got started, many other sensors would be highly useful for the right patients. And also what I'm excited about someday is the smartphone ultrasound that would be in everyone's home. That you could examine any part of the body.
Tell us about that. Tell us about the vision.
To me, this is one of the greatest advances we've made in medicine, and it's still not regarded with the way it should be. So a few years ago, I got a probe for the smartphone, and I started to examine first my heart, of course, but then I did a total body medical selfie. And the only part of the body you can't examine is the brain because of the cranium. But every other organ, you can get exquisite high resolution detail within seconds. And so that was a wake-up call to me. It was a eureka moment that what if now we made these really inexpensive and everyone could examine a relevant part of their body. Of course, we know some people, it would create even more anxiety, but for the right circumstance, like this, I mean, we already know you can ultrasound the lungs. So what if you had somebody who had oximetry that was starting to show a difference? You could just get images of the lung. You don't have to interpret it, the person. That can be done by algorithms and can be transmitted to video. And what I love now is that there's these new efforts of AI capture. So, you know, even a young child could get the right acquisition of images because the instructions are move the probe clockwise, move it up, move it down, and then it automatically captures the video. So that's where we're headed in a new world when we get the price down to nominal consumer levels, like, you know, less than $100, because you pop it in the smartphone, you get a little gel. I mean, you can use body lotion, doesn't it matter, but you get images that are amazing.
You can do it in the bathtub. Let me just lay this out for the layperson here, what the vision would be. There's so many diseases that can be treated, but that happen to be non-symptomatic. Cancer being at the forefront, but even things like stroke and congestive heart failure and others, where our today's practice of waiting for the pain to occur until you're upset about the pain, then seeing a doctor and the doctor finally diagnosing the cause of the pain seems to be the wrong method. Many cancers can be treated when caught very small, but when they finally create your back pain or your headache, it's way too late. So you're really talking about a vision where the diagnostics precedes the pain and even precedes the doctor contact to some extent.
Well, that's a lot to unpack because that's a really important point you're making. First of all, we do not want to have false positives, incidental findings. We don't want that. And so if we have everybody doing all sorts of tests, that's a bad recipe for that problem. Now, if we're smart about this and we have the right test for the right people, that's where we can make a difference. So a really good example, in the presence of COVID-19, people are afraid to go get medical attention. And we're seeing collateral damage. You know, people having lots of medical problems, they don't go and get seen. So there is an example of if people have more diagnostic power, that it could be helpful to know if their chest pain, for example, is actually lack of blood supply to their heart, or even an impending heart attack, an example. But now we're seeing for the first time, just a couple of weeks ago, a blood test for cancer, you know, with machine learning analytics in perfectly healthy people, making the diagnosis of cancer before anyone would know it. So if you then couple that with, okay, I have done your genomics, and I know, even though your parents didn't have cancer, I know you're at risk. And I'm going to every 6 months or a year do this blood test, and which is for specific gene variants and proteins. And I'm going to be ahead of you for cancer. You'll never get advanced cancer, which is how people die from cancer, because I will be on top of this. And that's where we're headed with AI and using the right tests for the right people, the right time.
This is an incredible vision. If I was listening to this, how can there be anything more important to do than that? And I lost my sister to breast cancer about 3 years ago, age 51. I lost my mother at age 49. My brother had a lung cancer, survived, the size of a grapefruit. So that is hitting very close to home, what you're saying.
Wow.
Well, Dr. Topol is famous for many things. In addition to his more than 1,500 publications, he actually recently wrote a best-selling book, the third best-selling book out of 10, called Deep Medicine: How Artificial Intelligence Can Make Healthcare Human Again. It follows, I think you also wrote the standard for interventional cardiology as a textbook for physicians. But these are more targeted at the general audience. And it follows a streak of books that look into digitization, how digital revolution will create better healthcare. And I took the liberty to go to Amazon. It says 173 ratings, almost perfect 5.0 rating. And just some citations here from Amazon. The book has been called The Crystal Ball for the Next Era of Healthcare. It's been called a masterpiece. And hands down, the best book on the topic. Why did you write it, and tell us about it?
Oh, thank you. It's the most important thing I've ever written. And it's just, you know, I got older and maybe a little bit smarter over the years about what's important. And what I started to realize, of course, is that the medicine as it exists today is in a sorry shape. There's a lot of serious issues. Of course, one, and perhaps the biggest, is we've lost the patient-doctor relationship. It's gone into attrition mode because we have so little time with patients, and we can't deal with the data. It's overwhelming for each patient. So we are more and more dissociated from patients just at the time when they need that trust, that presence, that connection, and that, you know, deep empathy. So how AI can take us back to the way medicine used to be. When I finished medical school in 1979, so over 40 years ago, medicine was characterized by an intimate relationship between a patient and a doctor. It was one of the most valued human connections that exist. Today, it's rare to see that. So I do believe we can get back to that. And that was the reason, you know, I spent 3 years to research and, you know, try to crystallize what I learned. And of course, as a practicing physician, what we could do with AI, which, Sebastian, you've done some remarkable work in this field as, for example, the first really major skin lesion paper diagnosing skin cancer. And we are going to see lots of AI for accuracy like that to boost up the doctor's performance, which we need because there's so many errors. But the biggest overarching, exciting potential is to bring back that human connection, the human touch, the vital aspect of empathy, because when we're sick, that's what we need.
I want to dig into this because most of us in the technical field look at this and say, wow, there's now better chest x-rays to AI. There's home-based cell phone ultrasound diagnostics to AI. There is skin cancer apps that can find skin cancer as good as the best human dermatologists and physicians. And that to many people feels like, oh my God, why do we need these things called doctors at all if AI can just do so much better? But New York Times reviewed your book, and I want to just give one quote from the New York Times review in March 2019. Dr. Topol believes that artificial intelligence can do more than enhance diagnosis and treatments. It can also save doctors from doing tasks like taking notes and reading scans, allowing them to spend more time connecting with their patients. So for you, it's a much broader picture than just better diagnostics and saving lives that way.
Yes, I mean, the biggest complaint of doctors today and patients correspondingly is the keyboard, that there's not even the eye-to-eye contact during a visit because the doctor's pecking at a keyboard. And that could be liberated today if we seriously get behind the AI frontier and use the conversation and process that. And already we've seen beautiful synthetic notes from AI, and that should be the norm, and it will be. It's already happening in certain places, in certain disciplines of medicine, but that's just one of the AI in the toolkit, one of the components. But what we have to do is to take all the different things that we can from, whether it's from speech and images and text, to then give doctors a boost in how they can process data and be more accurate and more efficient, not to replace them. We're not going to replace them because it gets back to your family, those 3 members of your family that were lost to cancer. You think that an algorithm would make them feel better? You think that they don't need a doctor? I mean, the point being is that when you're got a serious medical matter, you need to trust a doctor that's going to guide you and be with you, to really care about you, because that care is part of the treatment, and in some cases more important than the treatment. So the point being is, if we can offload a lot of the other mundane stuff like a rash, a urinary tract infection, an ear infection in a child, all these things that can be diagnosed by the patient or the parents of the child. Then we can get to the serious matters to bring the doctor and patient together. That's what we should be working on.
In your book, you also write about the risks, the cybersecurity threats, or you talk about it, the data privacy issues. We obviously live in a world where privacy is a very hotly debated topic, and we live in a world in the medical field with HIPAA and other regulations where there's incredible barriers between the exchange of data. What is your perspective here? What has to change to make this really possible?
Well, we've had obviously breaches of privacy and hacking and all sorts of issues with our data. In fact, more than 100 million Americans have had their medical data hacked, and they don't even know it, most of them. There's all sorts of cyber thievery, and this is a serious problem. We also have lost trust in some of the major tech titan companies because of the sense of our privacy being invaded. So with that background, we have to do much better to protect people. There's several ways we can do this, but for medical data, which is the most precious data because it's so sensitive, then we need to give people their own data. They have to own it because it's their body and they paid for it, and it can be life-saving, literally. And we don't respect that either. Again, it's part of that medical paternalism.
Many doctors tell me if I let the patient own the data, I make less money. Is that
well,
true?
They lose control. The point being is that here, their typical response, more than 60% of doctors today in the United States won't even give the patients their notes of the clinic visit. They won't give them their notes. And the reason they say is because it's my note. I own the note. Even though it's the patient, it's the work product that the patient paid for.
Yeah, we know more about our credit card bills than we know about our body. Sometimes it feels like this.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing is when this has been prospectively studied in multiple centers in the Open Notes Project, when doctors were circumspect and they didn't think that the patient could deal with their own notes, that is, they couldn't handle the truth, they all got turned around and they all think that this should be standard practice, but it still isn't standard practice. So the point being here is that if people own their data and shared it, most would share it readily, but they feel a sense of control and they have it all. And no one today in the United States has all their medical data from when they were born to the present time. And that's the way it should be. That's the way it is in Estonia and in many other countries. It's getting that way. So we should do that because
possibly in China.
The whole idea is that we talk about patient-centered. You hear that term a lot. Well, unless the patient owns the data, it's not centered about the patient. So that's one part of the story. But of course, we have to respect that privacy is an important matter. But here, again, in the US and in many other countries now that are trying to reopen, we know, like for example, in Germany, they took our digital heart rate app idea and they launched it by their CDC, the Robert Koch Institute. Now over 500,000 German citizens have resting heart rate being continuously monitored. In China, more than 1.3 million people are having their resting heart rate being monitored. So the question is, would people today accept the trade-off of giving anonymized heart rate data to help find a new emerging outbreak before it spreads, and as a privacy invasion? Or would they rather not go back to work? I mean, that's kind of, do you want to surrender some extent of privacy for a return towards some semblance of normalcy? This is the tricky trade-off that we have today.
You could even say, are you willing to give up some basic privacy in exchange for your life?
Well, that may be, yeah.
In COVID, in many cases, early treatment trumps late treatment. And
right.
For a long, non-symptomatic disease that could be very, very severe, as you pointed out from the Princess Diamond data, That might be all the difference. But let's talk a bit about, I love what you're saying, about education and the path through this. I mean, you teach, I teach at Stanford and at Udacity. We see this almost iron curtains between the medical school and the engineering schools. What has to happen? How do we have to change the educational fabric of this country to get there?
Yeah, well, we do have a problem, and I think Udacity is one of the ways to bridge that, is bringing people together from different disciplines. One of the things that's going to happen in this COVID era is that we're going to see much more of these virtual learning experiences, because we've come a long way from where we were when you started Udacity, even, for the ability to do that and for it to work really well. So transdisciplinary approaches, it's like what you see today. So many people have shifted their emphasis. I mean, my interest in research was pure AI, but now I've shifted to pure COVID right now. But we're all working together: epidemiologists, virologists, genomicists, AI, computer scientists, and computational biologists, and the list goes on and on. Ethicists, So we need to do that to get that that multifaceted, multidimensional view to make the advances. Because in a world where people are just, working in their discipline, we'll make very little progress. We'll have very little innovation. But you can see now that scientists love a big challenge. The bigger the challenge, the more it gets their juices flowing. And we've got the biggest challenge of our lives right now.
Yes, we do. So if you say, and I've seen a lot of young engineering students being blissfully ignorant of what it actually means to be in the medical sector. And by transitivity, I assume a lot of young doctors don't quite understand what deep learning really means. Do you think that doctors should take a class on deep learning and build a neural network? Or is this reaching too far?
No, I think that would be a great way. They don't have to become so facile and to get deep into deep learning. But I think every doctor, by having some familiarity, will understand both its remarkable advantages and power, and also the nuances and the issues about how to interpret that. And the fact, once you learn enough about deep learning, you realize all these papers that discuss outperformance of doctors are really not, it's not the real deal. I mean, what you're talking about is, of course, the coupling of efforts, the fusion, the synergy. So there already have been papers from my colleague, Piers Keane, the ophthalmologist in the UK, who wrote about how when you gave doctors who never coded, had no experience, and they started to play with deep learning algorithms, how they quickly became very enthusiastic. They saw the benefits. They also saw the whole. So we need more of that. It isn't just like a didactic type session. It's actually hands-on. A session like that could be of immense value.
I'm happy to hear this. I mean, I think of doctors, in part engineers, and not just engineers when it comes to the human body, but also the human psychologist and the human relationship. And that's what engineers do. Conversely, if you are an enthusiastic, say, computer scientist, electrical engineer, how can you possibly get your feet dirty or your hands wet in a real clinical setting where you can really make an impact and understand what making an impact really means?
Right. Well, I think it's a bit of a challenge today because of the distancing issue. But before we were hit with this, we were bringing AI scientists, data scientists into the clinic, seeing patients together to give them that extraordinary inspiration. Because one of the things that we're missing here is we have a limited human talent pool in this field. And too much of it is diverted towards other sectors, whether it's the social media or the financial, or we need them in medicine. We need them in healthcare, because the pandemic has taught us again, if we didn't know already, this is the most precious thing in our lives is our health. And it's a noble effort. So to get people who are computer scientists to realize that what their work is so vital is to get them to be seeing patients together with clinicians. And so we need more of that. And I want to get to that point in the future, because when you start having, like, for example, we had a course every year called The Future of Genomic Medicine. And we would always start it each day with a patient telling their story. And the scientists in the group, which was most of the people who had never seen a patient, live talking except their own family members, they would get motivated to do more of that work. And we need a lot more of that direct contact between patients and scientists.
I think we are slightly breaking up right now. No, I have you back. I think I lost you for a few seconds.
I'm okay.
Good.
Great.
That must be the lack of G5. Good. I have two audience questions here that are kind of overlap with what we already talked about. So maybe you take it in a more specific direction. But a student named Alexander asked, what has been the most surprising finding in data sets that help predict or track health issues? And maybe you can talk about data of healthy people, data of people that never showed symptoms.
Well, yeah, I think you mean, Sebastian, in terms of the COVID-19 data or broadly of AI?
Either one, you choose.
Okay. I think the thing that is striking from the deep neural nets is that it picks up things that even the most expert doctors could never see or even think of. I mean, one of the great examples that I use in healthcare is how you show a retinal picture to the leading international experts of the retina. And you say, is this from a male or a female? And the answer they give you is 50% accurate. And you put the same images, hundreds of thousands of images through neural nets, and it has 98% accuracy. Now, there are better ways to determine gender than a retinal image, but this is consistent. What we're seeing is the power of what machines can see and pick up that humans will never be able to pick up. And this is the power of AI personified. So I think what we're seeing now more broadly is we learn about the biology through these neural nets. The things that it picks up, we can then say, once you deconstruct the network, you start to say, that's what's interesting. The reason these people progress is because of this, whereas we didn't know that. So I think it's amazing at many different levels. And I have more respect for well-validated, large data sets and what they can do to transform the future of medicine. Now, that's the surprising feature, is the extent, the magnitude of the difference between experts versus machines. But obviously, we're still early in this process. We have limited large and annotated data sets. We still don't know how well self-supervised learning is going to get us forward in AI. We need to know that. But frankly, the fact that it's so early and we're making this much substantial progress is highly encouraging.
Great. What you just said, Eric, makes me believe that 500 years from now, we're going to look back and say, wow, this was medieval times. We didn't even look. I mean, just if you can find the gender from the eyeball. I think there's similar results for gender detection from 30 seconds of ECG data, heart data. Yeah, that is very surprising, and it's just coming out now. So if I were interested in people and artificial intelligence, it feels like this is so much low-hanging fruit right now of stuff that hasn't been done yet.
Well, you touched on one of the surprise issue. I've been reading cardiograms for 30 plus years. It's one of my favorite things. I love cardiograms. And I can never tell you if the cardiogram is from a man or a woman, but the algorithms are right 95%. I mean,
a live core has gotten there.
Yeah, exactly. You start to say, we're so stupid. But on the other hand, this is where they come together and make doctors and nurses and all clinicians, whether it's paramedics, whether it's pharmacists, every clinician will get an edge getting AI powered.
It also feels like it takes 10,000 or more hours to become an expert. And if I could use AI to have a better doctor, I would love to have a better doctor.
Yeah, well, that was a Malcolm Gladwell aphorism that was pushed forward, but you don't need 10,000 hours with AI. You just need, really great validation, and you're set to go.
Right, but if the AI could learn from experienced doctors like yourself and codify this and then bring it to less experienced practitioners that just are entering the field, who knows? We might see more things that we haven't seen before.
Well, you're bringing up another point with that, and that is that these ground truths that we use, they're often not by the experts. They're by anyone. They're not necessarily ideally what we consider as ground truths. So, if we took more experts to devote their time into help building the absolute best neural networks, that would help as well, for sure.
Chrysanthi is another student who's asking, my second, I think last student's question today. Will AI alone be able to enhance the future of healthcare? You hinted at this, but I'd love you to chip in how you see the relationship of doctors and AI evolve.
Well, I think alone is kind of interesting way to put it. I don't see it as alone. I mean, everything's intertwined. If you just look at the AI effects for improving workflow, improving accuracy, that's starting to happen, and it's going to be much more so in the years ahead. But if we just look at AI from that framework, we're not seeing the big leap, which is taking medicine back, bringing back the human connection. Of course, that would be, most people reject that technology can enhance humanity. But if there ever was an example, this is it.
I'm so thrilled to be interviewing one of the most visionary and most accomplished medical person in the world. I wish we could take that part of your vision and enthusiasm and put it into AI and give it to every person so they can be equipped with a vision as opposed to with the fear of the unknown or the clinging to the conventional. Let me ask the last question. I don't want to go into politics. I think we all have become hobby and medical doctors now and epidemiologists with the ongoing crisis. But more longer term, if you could run this nation longer term, or maybe run the human health services, or be the general surgeon, where would you take this nation? But what would you do for us as a country?
Well, we certainly could do far better than we have done and we are doing with no national plan to combat this vicious pandemic. But in addition to that, we're not investing as we should into the science, life science and information data science as we should. We rely much too strongly on these piecemeal fragmented efforts. And so I think the idea of just, what's interesting, Sebastian, is here we are coming up with trillions of dollars just out of the blue, trillions, and another 3 trillion now being discussed. Where were those funds to support the research and the science in this country? That is, we have some $30-odd billion a year for the NIH. That's all. And even lesser amount for the National Science Foundation. So what I would do is not just double down, quadruple down, and use those funds wisely to promote young people, transdisciplinary work, high risk work. Not that you already have the answer and you're sending in the grant because you'll get the funding kind of. That's just ridiculous. So I think we could do this. And we could advance, but right now we've gotten complacent. We've gotten to a point of, really stagnant. relatively stagnant. And here it is, we're not just facing the biggest challenge, but we're at the most exciting time when data science and health, medical, biomedical, life sciences all come together. And what an opportunity that we have to capitalize on that. So that's what I would push for.
What a great final word. This, thank you so much, Dr. Topol. It's been a privilege and honor to conversing with you. This ends our keynote and conversation Q&A with Dr. Topol in AI, healthcare, and COVID. Welcome back, everybody, to the second day of AI for healthcare in the times of COVID-19. We're going to go into a break and resume at 10 o'clock. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
That was great.
Oh, well, you're very kind. Thank you so much, Sebastian. I look forward to more interactions with you. This has really been phenomenal.
We should get you in front of national television with the same message, because it's so beautiful and so well thought through.
Well, I look forward to our next chance to visit.
Absolutely. I hope to meet you in person when this is all over.
Oh, I look forward to that as well. I get up to Stanford pretty frequently, so I'll make sure that we
flying cars as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.